Hey guys, tonight we drift down a cobbled street where the lanterns sputter and the shutters squeak against the wind, and you find yourself tugged by curiosity into the warm, dim glow of a medieval tailor's shop. The doorway is crooked. The signboard is painted with a needle and a spool of thread that's peeling with age, and the faint smell of wool, sweat, and beeswax clings to the air. You step inside, and suddenly you're surrounded by the soft rhythm of needles pulling through cloth, the scratch of shears on wooden tables, and the murmured gossip of apprentices who barely glance up as you enter. You're in the heart of a place where people are dressed not by rulers and numbers, but by instinct, by practiced eyes, and by hands that seem to carry generations of memory. The scene feels cozy, but let's not romanticize it too much, because if you had to actually survive in one of these outfits, stitched in smoky little rooms where sanitation was basically non-existent, you probably wouldn't last long. Wool soaked in sweat, lice in the seams, and not a single washing machine in sight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I always love knowing if you're tucked in at midnight, or if you're sneaking this in on a rainy afternoon somewhere across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You linger by the doorway and notice the way the lantern casts crooked shadows across the wooden tables. No one in this room is using anything you'd recognize from a modern clothing store. No plastic tape measure dangling around a neck, no patterned paper rustling, no neat stacks of sizes labeled small, medium, large. Instead, there's an almost ritualistic rhythm to the way the tailor runs his hands across the cloth, pinches it, squints, and then nods as if some private calculation has clicked into place. It feels alien, doesn't it? In your own life, sizing is reduced to numbers: waist 32, inseam 30, chest 40. But here, you watch the master tailor look at a client, maybe walk a slow circle around him, then stretch his own arm across the fabric like an improvised ruler. Every gesture is deliberate. He reaches out with his thumb, presses it against the table, and mutters something to his apprentice. You realize the shop itself is the measuring tape. The walls, the tables, even the tailor's body. One of the apprentices notices you watching and smirks. He's maybe 12, his fingers raw from threading needles all day, and he leans close enough to whisper. You're wondering how we size a man without a cord or stick, aren't you? His grin flashes, quick and conspiratorial, like he's offering you a piece of forbidden knowledge. And you think about it, this is the Middle Ages, where literacy is rare, paper expensive, and standardized rulers not exactly hanging in every marketplace. So the body itself became the template. Mainstream historians often point out that medieval trades relied less on tools and more on shared conventions. You could tell a story in cubits, in spans, in thumb widths, and everyone understood roughly what that meant. But quirky details survive in letters and guild records. One tailor boasting that he could size a client just by watching him eat, another claiming he could guess a man's waist by the sound of his laughter. Do you believe them? Historians still argue whether such stories are exaggerated bragging rights, or if some tailors truly developed a sixth sense for proportion. You let your eyes wander across the shop. Bolts of fabric lean against the wall, wool dyed deep madder red, rough-spun linen, a smattering of imported silk shimmering faintly in the candlelight. Each piece is precious. Cutting cloth was always a risk. One wrong snip, and you've wasted weeks of someone's wages. That's why the tailor's movements seem so reverent, so cautious, as though each line he imagines in his head must be tested against the drape of the fabric, the stretch of the weave. Your ears catch the clang of the city outside, horses clopping, vendors shouting, but inside, the soundscape is intimate. A woman coughs softly as she hems a sleeve. Someone hums a fragment of plain chant. A dog snuffles near the fireplace, probably the tailor's only concession to warmth on a freezing night. And as you take all this in, you can't help but marvel at the calm certainty of these people, working without the one object you'd consider essential, a measuring tape. The tailor gestures for you to step forward. His hands are calloused, his nails rimmed with grime, but there's a tenderness in the way he brushes your sleeve as though gauging how heavy the fabric might fall on you. He holds his thumb out, lines it against your forearm, and nods. It's not just guesswork, it's centuries of practice encoded in the tiny, repeated rituals of daily craft. And as you watch, you realize this isn't just about clothes. It's about a world where bodies themselves were the standard, where a handspan was worth more than an inch, and where tailors learned to trust their eyes and their touch more than any tool. This was survival, style, and social identity stitched together under lantern light. You shuffle a little deeper into the tailor's cramped shop, careful not to bump your hip against the low table where shears lie waiting like small weapons. The master tailor clears his throat and stretches his arms as if preparing for a performance. And in a way, that's exactly what it is. You're about to see one of his most important tricks, the simple yet surprisingly precise art of measuring with body parts. He doesn't bother with anything resembling a ruler. Instead, he places his own hand flat on the fabric, thumb pressed wide, fingers splayed, and counts silently. 1 span, 2 spans, 3 spans. Each handspan is as familiar to him as any number you've memorized, and the apprentices scribble nothing down, because they don't have to. They memorize through repetition, watching the master turn body into tool over and over again. It's strange for you, raised in a world where centimeters and inches feel like fixed truths. Here, nothing is fixed except the tailor's own proportions. His cubit, the length from elbow to fingertip, is not the same as the baker's cubit or the carpenter's cubit. And yet it works, because the tailor isn't building a bridge or measuring grain. He's fitting one body with another body's estimate. Close enough is good enough when you can adjust on the fly. You notice how he leans in, eyeing the client's shoulders, then holds his own forearm across the cloth, mimicking what he sees. An arm for an arm, he mutters, satisfied. His apprentice nods reverently, as though some sacred formula has just been recited. You realize the language of tailoring is less about mathematics and more about poetry, shapes, gestures, resemblances. There's a mainstream historical note here. Across Europe, most everyday measurements came from the human frame. The span of a hand, the pace of a stride, the breadth of a thumb. And tailors weren't alone in this. Builders, merchants, even sailors used their bodies to tally space and weight. But here's the quirky twist. Some towns had official body parts carved in stone. A handspan, a foot, a cubit, all etched into a cathedral wall or market square so tradesmen could compare. Imagine the irony. Human limbs immortalized in stone, yet every real human still different. The tailor pauses, looking at you with a half-smile, as though reading your doubt. Does this system actually work? Historians still argue whether medieval clothes fit snugly the way movies suggest, or whether they were usually much looser, designed to forgive the inevitable imprecision. Some scholars believe the beautiful tight doublets you see in paintings were exaggerated for show, not everyday reality. Others insist that skilled tailors truly could capture astonishing accuracy just by eye and arm. The master claps once, startling his sleepy apprentices. He wants to demonstrate the span method. Grabbing a bolt of brown wool, he presses his thumb at one end, stretches his fingers as wide as they'll go, and announces, 1. Then he resets and counts again, and again, down the length of cloth. No numbers written, no chalk marks yet, just memory, rhythm, and trust. The apprentices murmur the tally in unison, like a chant. You realize this is training not just for math, but for muscle. They'll carry this rhythm in their hands for life. It's mesmerizing in its simplicity, and yet a little terrifying. You imagine buying a cloak only to find one sleeve drooping past your knuckles, the other stopping at your elbow. But the tailor seems confident. His handspan is his truth, his cubit his gospel. If he has to adjust later, well, that's what pins and draping are for. You glance around and catch sight of the apprentices practicing on scraps, stretching fingers, testing spans, measuring elbows against cloth. One boy keeps slipping, miscounting, and the master whacks him gently with the flat of his shears. "Your arm is lazy," he growls. The boy blushes, but keeps going, determined to internalize his own body as ruler. Outside, a bell tolls from the parish church, and you realize time itself is being kept by bells and shadows while space is being kept by limbs and digits. No watches, no clocks, no measuring tapes. Yet somehow, entire societies are clothed, markets are supplied, armies are outfitted. You can't help but think of your own habits. When was the last time you judged distance by pacing it out, or measured a table with your forearm instead of pulling out your phone? Here, though, it's daily life, second nature. You're reminded of that cheeky medieval boast. A good tailor knows a man's girth by the way he stretches his arms when yawning. Sounds absurd, but after watching this performance, maybe not impossible. The master tailor now folds the fabric neatly, satisfied with his spans and cubits. He nods at you with a tiny smirk, as if daring you to argue. And though part of you wonders how many lopsided tunics have walked out of this very shop, another part admires the confidence, the centuries of tradition held in one stretched hand. The tailor grins at you as if to say, "Spans and cubits are nice, but wait until you see this." He places the cloth flat against the table, leans down, and presses his thumb firmly onto the surface. That thumb, rough from years of snipping wool and threading needles, suddenly becomes the star of the show. With one simple gesture, he declares, "This is my measuring stick." He drags his thumb across the fabric, marking each width with a tiny scratch of chalk. One thumb, two thumbs, three thumbs. The apprentices echo the count like an echo in a cathedral. You realize quickly that the thumb is the most democratic of rulers. Everyone has one, everyone trusts it, but everyone's is a little different. And that difference is exactly where the magic, or the chaos, can sneak in. You lean closer, noticing how deliberate the movement is. Each thumb width is pressed flat, no gaps, no fudging. 4 hems, cuffs, and seams. This trick is foolproof enough. A hem too long trips you, too short looks stingy. But a thumb width, about the distance needed to tuck a stitch, to fold a border, feels just right. There's a mainstream historical truth here. The inch we still use today comes, in part, from thumb measurements. In Old English, the inch was literally the width of a man's thumb at the base. Standardization only came much later, but in the Middle Ages, the thumb was as close as most folks got to universal math. And here's a quirky little tidbit. In some towns, people joked about fat thumb tailors. If a tailor had especially wide thumbs, customers suspected he was cheating them, charging more cloth than was fair. A man's thumb could inflate the bill, and more than one guild dispute probably started with someone muttering, "That fellow measures with a butcher's thumb." The master tailor demonstrates on you now. He crouches, chalk in hand, and presses a thumb at the hemline of your tunic. Tap, mark, his thumb carving invisible units down the length. It's intimate, almost unnervingly so, and you realize how personal tailoring really was. No standing back while a tape snaps around you. Here, someone's body brushes yours. Someone's thumb decides how you'll look. Historians still argue whether this thumb method was enough for precision tailoring, especially when noble clients demanded extravagance. Could a sleeve be cut to puff just so, or a doublet cling perfectly, using only thumbs and chalk? Or did those fine, courtly outfits require extra, hidden tools, rods, cords, or the client's own garments as templates? The truth is likely somewhere between. But watching the tailor work, you sense how much trust was involved. The apprentices, eager to impress, practice with their own thumbs. One boy, skinny and pale, holds his thumb so rigid it trembles. Another, chunkier, presses his thumb so carelessly that the marks wobble like drunken footprints. The master sighs and demonstrates again, the thumb steady, unhurried. It isn't just the size that matters, it's the consistency. The shop smells faintly of chalk dust now, that soft mineral scent mingling with wool and sweat. You hear the whisper of cloth being folded, the scrape of chalk across rough wooden planks. The rhythm is hypnotic, like watching waves lapping ashore. Thumb mark, and you can't help but compare it to your world. Your clothes are ordered online, measured by algorithms, produced in factories where numbers are king. But here, you're reminded that clothing once came from something far more human. A thumb pressed into fabric, a decision made by instinct, not calculation. It feels less efficient, sure, but also oddly intimate, like each garment carries a piece of the tailor himself. As the tailor finishes, he dusts his chalked thumb against his apron, leaving a white streak. He nods once, as though sealing the measurement with authority. His apprentice carefully folds the cloth, and you wonder how many centuries of hems have been measured exactly this way, by thumbs smudged with chalk and pride. The tailor wipes his hands on a rag, then beckons you toward a tall shelf stacked with bolts of cloth. His eyes glimmer with pride as he explains, though not in so many words, that sometimes a thumb isn't enough. For sleeves and tunics, hems and cuffs, sure. But when whole lengths of fabric must be cut, you reach for something older, something more universal, the human limb itself. He pulls one arm across the table and measures with the inside of his elbow to the tip of his fingers. A cubit, his apprentice whispers reverently, as though speaking of a sacred relic. You watch the master mark the wool with his knife's flat edge. 1 cubit, 2 cubits, 3. The cloth seems to obey, falling in measured folds, as though the tailor's arm were ordained for the task. A cubit, roughly 18 inches by modern reckoning, was one of humanity's earliest units of measurement. Egyptians carved it into stone rods, Romans passed it along, and by the Middle Ages, it was stitched into daily life. Builders, merchants, tailors, all knew the cubit by heart, even if everyone's arm was a little different. The irony is delicious. Civilization advanced on the back of something as inconsistent as elbows. Now the tailor crouches, pressing his foot against the cloth. 1 foot, he declares, and suddenly you see the whole medieval logic. Bodies measure bodies. The very parts that carry you through the world also decide how fabric will drape across your shoulders. A foot of cloth is not abstract. It's tangible, grounded, tactile. Here's a quirky fact. Some guilds required tailors to mark their shop benches with official feet or cubits carved into the wood. That way, clients could compare the tailor's foot to the benches, ensuring no sneaky upcharges. Imagine shopping for a tunic and demanding to see the tailor's elbow matched against a carved stick. Not exactly a quick trip to the mall, but not everyone trusted such methods. Historians still argue whether regional fairs and courts actually tried to standardize these body-based units, or whether variation was simply accepted as part of life. Some argue that courts fined dishonest tailors for false cubits, while others believe such rules were more symbolic than enforced. After all, how do you really police the length of an elbow? The master gestures for you to try it. Awkwardly, you press your own elbow against the cloth, stretching to your fingertips. The apprentice laughs softly. It's harder than it looks, keeping the cloth taut and marking it cleanly without slipping. You feel clumsy, and yet for the tailor, this motion is muscle memory, as natural as you reaching for your phone. The shop fills with a kind of rhythm. One apprentice chanting cubits, another counting feet, the master sliding chalk across the weave. It feels more like choreography than arithmetic, a dance where limbs replace rulers. You hear the shuffle of their feet on the rush-strewn floor, the occasional snap of thread, the quiet murmur of correction when someone miscounts. And in that moment, you see the genius of it. Measurement isn't a cold, detached act, it's embodied. The very people making the clothes lend their own forms to the task. Your shirt, your cloak, your hose, they all carry within them the ghostly shapes of other bodies, other hands. The tailor finishes, dusts his palms, and gestures to the pile of cloth now neatly cubit and footed into submission. His apprentices nod, satisfied. And you can't help but think, in a world without tape measures, rulers, or calculators, the human form itself became the first and truest yardstick. The tailor squints at the freshly cubit lengths on the table, then rummages in a drawer until he produces something humbler, almost laughably plain. A coil of string, worn smooth with wax, curled like a snake asleep. He dangles it for you to see, and you can't help smiling. It looks like something a child might toss aside after a game. But in this dim little shop, it's as powerful as any gilded tool. He stretches the cord between his hands, pulling it taut, then knots it at one end. With a swift motion, he presses it against your waist, ties a loose slipknot where the string meets itself, and pulls it away. Voila, your measurement, captured not on paper or wood, but in a single line of cord. This, he explains with a grunt, is a tailor's silent assistant. A string doesn't judge, doesn't slip, and best of all, travels easily in a pocket. The apprentices keep several lengths looped around their belts, some marked with soot, others hardened with beeswax so they hold their shape. Mainstream historians agree that cords, strings, and waxed threads were essential in the absence of tape. A cord could hug the curves of a body, record them invisibly, then be tucked away until the tailor needed to lay it flat on cloth. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors rubbed their cords with chalk or charcoal, then snapped them against fabric like builders do today with chalk lines, leaving ghostly traces of straight marks across the wool. The same tool that hugged a belly could also guide the path of scissors. But there's debate here too. Historians still argue whether such cords were truly widespread in small town shops, or mostly reserved for guild tailors in larger cities. Was string measuring a luxury of prosperous workshops, or the everyday trick of every needleworker from Paris to Prague? The records are silent, leaving us to imagine the variety. The master demonstrates again, this time wrapping the cord around his own thick thigh. He pinches the knot tight, slips it off, and lays it against the fabric. An apprentice carefully marks the place where the knot rests, then stretches the string down to create the outline of a trouser leg. It's shockingly quick. No numbers, no arithmetic, just the memory of a knot. You step closer, and notice how tactile the whole ritual feels. The cord drags faintly across your skin, its waxy surface catching on the weave of your tunic. It's both crude and elegant. Crude because it's nothing more than string, elegant because it solves the problem perfectly. The apprentices hum as they practice. One ties knots at intervals to mimic inches. Another dabs tiny drops of colored wax, so he can reuse the cord for different clients. Their belt pouches jingle with cords rolled like coins, each one holding the secret dimensions of a paying customer. Privacy wasn't exactly a medieval obsession, but you can imagine the gossip. An apprentice accidentally mixing up cords, delivering the wrong girth to the wrong man, sparking laughter in the alehouse later that night. The tailor catches you watching and raises an eyebrow. To him, this isn't quaint, it's craft. The cord holds memory the way your phone might, except this one doesn't crash, doesn't need charging, doesn't scroll. Just knots and wax and touch. Outside, the faint cries of a market hawker filter through the shutters. You realize that the same string used to measure you here might later be pulled across a market stall to check a length of cheesecloth, or even tied around a sheep's fleece before sale. Nothing wasted, everything adapted. The tailor finally coils the cord neatly and slips it into his apron pocket, patting it like a treasure. His apprentices nod, as though another lesson has been sealed into their bones. And you, half amused, half awed, realize that in this small gesture of wax and string, you've seen one of the quiet marvels of medieval ingenuity. The tailor's hands dive once more into the folds of his apron, and this time what he pulls free isn't a tool at all. It's a belt. A long leather girdle, dark with age, creased from years of buckling. The sort of thing every man and woman in the Middle Ages wore daily, whether to cinch a tunic, hang a pouch, or simply keep one's dignity in place. He raises it with a chuckle and holds it out to you, the gesture almost theatrical. This, too, is a measuring device. At first you think he's joking. A belt? Surely belts are the end product, not the means. But the apprentices nod gravely, as though you've just been shown the key to a locked door. And then you see it. Belts aren't just accessories. They are personal rulers, already molded to the body they serve. No need for guessing. No need for cords or cubits when the client walks in wearing the perfect template around his waist. The master tailor motions for you to remove your own belt. It feels awkward, exposing yourself in this dim shop with apprentices staring. But he takes it gently, lays it on the table, and runs his thumb along the row of holes. Each notch tells a story. how tightly you cinched it last winter when stew was scarce, how loosely it fit after a summer of festivals and indulgence. The leather is a living record of your body's changing fortunes, a timeline written in stretched hide and punctured holes. Mainstream historical records note this practice often. Tailors would borrow a belt, girdle, or even a strap from the client and use it as a reference for cutting cloth. It was quick, efficient, and impossible to dispute. The belt does not lie. One saying went, though you can imagine a few embarrassed customers protesting that perhaps it had been worn on an off day. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval wills list belts as bequeathable items, handed down from father to son, not just as useful gear, but as cherished tokens of identity. Imagine inheriting not only your father's dagger, but also his belt, stretched and softened by his life. And yes, some tailors, so rumor goes, use those heirloom belts as sizing guides for the next generation's clothes, trusting the family resemblance to carry through. Historians still argue whether this reliance on belts meant that medieval clothes were generally cut looser than what paintings suggest. Some scholars claim belts were reliable only for the waist, leaving shoulders and limbs to guesswork. Others insist that belts, combined with draping and adjustment, offered enough precision for most garments, especially in an age when perfect symmetry wasn't expected. The debate lingers, leaving us to weigh imagination against practicality. The tailor demonstrates now. He holds your belt against a length of linen, aligning the buckle with one end, then stretches the strap taut. Where the last worn hole lies, he makes a chalk mark, then doubles the belt along the fabric to mark the opposite side. With only 2 gestures, he sketched the entire waistband of a new tunic. His apprentice leans forward, studying each motion, committing it to memory. You notice how ritualistic it feels. The belt isn't just leather, it's authority. The tailor treats it with care, laying it flat, smoothing out its twists, aligning it with the weave of the fabric. It's as if the belt has been elevated to the role of silent partner in the craft. And then, almost playfully, the apprentices take turns. One wraps the belt around his own skinny waist, the leather sagging comically. Another stretches it across his thigh, giggling. But the master silences them with a glare, reminding them that this isn't play but practice. For clients, the belt is sacred, an extension of themselves entrusted to the tailor. You lean against the wall, listening to the quiet creak of leather, the scrape of chalk on fabric, the hushed counting of apprentices marking folds. It strikes you how personal medieval tailoring truly was. No anonymous numbers, no abstract measurements, just the client's own possessions, their belt, their girdle, sometimes even a shoe or glove, handed over to shape their next garment. Outside, a wagon rattles by, the bells of a mule jangling in rhythm. Inside, the tailor coils your belt carefully and returns it with a nod, as if sealing a pact between craftsman and client. And you can't help but think, somewhere in that strip of leather lies not just your waistline but your history, your meals, your feasts, your hungers, all pressed into a single tool that tailors have trusted for centuries. The master tailor gestures for quiet, and the apprentices scurry to the corners of the room, their chatter replaced by the creak of benches and the faint hiss of the hearth. He pulls forward another length of cloth, this one pale, raw linen, and smooths it across the scarred tabletop. Then, with a flourish, he lifts something white and powdery from a small wooden bowl. Chalk, the simplest of minerals, but in this room it holds the authority of pen and ink. He presses the chalk stub to the fabric, dragging a line so crisp it seems to glow against the weave. The apprentices lean in with held breath. To them, this is more than a mark. It's the first cut in potential, the invisible boundary between success and waste. One wrong line, and the whole garment will hang awkwardly forever. Chalk, then, isn't just chalk, it's a promise. You feel a twinge of recognition. Tailors today still use chalk for marking seams and hems, a tradition unbroken for centuries. That connection comforts you, a thin, powdery line bridging your world and theirs. The master pauses, then demonstrates alternatives. 4 darker cloths, deep green wool or indigo-dyed linen, chalk is useless. So he snatches a stub of charcoal from the fire pit, its end smudging instantly against his calloused fingers. He sketches a curved line directly onto the cloth, its black edge biting deep into the pale threads. The apprentices flinch, as though the fabric has been wounded, but he waves them off. "Charcoal washes away," he mutters, almost proudly. Mainstream historical accounts note this habit clearly. Tailors kept chalk, charcoal, and even the sharpened points of knives to score cloth. A blade's scratch could serve as a temporary guide, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. And yes, here comes the quirky tidbit. Some tailors dipped their fingers in candle soot, dragging blackened fingertips over linen to sketch rough outlines. Imagine your shirt beginning as a smudge of soot, drawn by hands darkened like a chimney sweep's. But there's controversy here. Historians still argue whether medieval tailors always marked cloth so boldly. Some suggest that many garments were draped and cut freehand, chalk and charcoal used only when necessary. Others argue the opposite, that marking was the only safeguard in a world where fabric was expensive, mistakes costly, and apprentices clumsy. The truth likely flickered between both practices, depending on wealth, region, and temperament of the tailor. The master tailor continues, his chalk lines flowing with surprising grace. He doesn't measure so much as imagine, sketching shapes that resemble wings and sails more than sleeves or tunics. He explains with a grunt. The cloth itself suggests its lines. The weave whispers where it wants to fold. The texture hints at the way it will drape. You don't force the fabric, you converse with it. His apprentices imitate him, scratching crooked lines across practice scraps. One boy presses too hard, the chalk snapping in half. Another drags charcoal so heavily that the cloth tears slightly. The master sighs but does not scold. Instead, he demonstrates again, this time slower. A graceful arc for a neckline, a clean straight edge for a hem. Watching him, you realize his hand is steadier than any ruler. His body may measure, but his imagination guides. The sensory details strike you. The chalk squeaks faintly on the tight weave, like a mouse in the rafters. Charcoal crumbles, leaving smudges on fingertips that smear across cheeks when apprentices wipe sweat without thinking. Knife scores whisper faintly as they drag shallow lines into wool. The table itself bears scars of centuries, chalk dust embedded in cracks, faint soot lines ghosting across the wood, scratches where blades cut too deep. This table is as much a record as any parchment chronicle. You find yourself oddly soothed by the process. In your world, clothing begins as pixels on a screen, designs replicated endlessly by machines. Here, every garment starts as a hand-drawn line, ephemeral, subject to error, personal as a signature. Each chalk mark is unique, never to be repeated, erased the moment cloth is washed or cut. The master finishes his demonstration by folding the cloth neatly along the chalk marks, then lifting his shears with a flourish. Snip, snip, the lines vanish, transformed into edges. Chalk has fulfilled its destiny, not as a permanent record, but as a guide, a whisper in the tailor's hand. He wipes his fingers on his apron, leaving faint white streaks that join 100 others. The apprentices sweep chalk dust into their palms, rubbing it away like magicians concealing a trick. And you, standing in the flickering lantern light, realize you've just watched something both mundane and miraculous. A shirt born from powder, soot, and scratches on a board. The shears rest heavy in the master's palm, their iron jaws glinting in the lamplight. They're not the sleek, stainless steel fabric scissors you know from craft stores. These are long, brutal things, half tool, half weapon. The apprentices eye them with awe and caution, as though one slip could shear off more than cloth. And honestly, given how clumsy the youngest looks, you're not sure that's just paranoia. He lifts the blades with two hands, almost reverent, and the first cut begins. The sound is not what you expect. Not a clean snip, but a drawn-out crunch, like celery snapping under slow pressure. Wool resists, linen whispers, silk slides. Each fabric speaks its own language as it's parted. And here's the catch. No tape measure guides these cuts. Instead, the lines drawn in chalk and soot act as a ghost map, and the master's eye does the rest. You lean closer, noticing how he angles the shears. He doesn't hack straight through. Instead, he follows the weave. A cut that obeys the thread means the edge won't fray too badly, won't fight the seam when stitched. Even without a ruler, precision is born from patience and listening to fabric's own grain. Mainstream historical records describe shears as prized possessions. A good pair might last decades, even generations, sharpened until the handles wore smooth. And because iron was costly, only a master might own them outright. Apprentices sometimes practiced with smaller blades, or even borrowed the master's under strict watch. Here's the quirky detail. Some tailors, lacking proper shears, used knives instead, long, thin blades drawn in careful strokes. The cut was less clean, more prone to fray, but necessity often trumps perfection. There are even mentions of shears chained to tables in guild workshops, not because of theft, but because apprentices had a nasty habit of accidentally dropping them on their feet to get out of work. Imagine the drama of limping theatrically for a week, all because the scissors looked too intimidating. But debates remain. Historians still argue whether cutting always followed chalked lines or whether tailors often cut freehand, guided by a mental pattern. Some fragments of garments suggest astonishing symmetry, as if they'd been cut from templates, while others bear wonky, seems hinting at improvisation. Was the precision legendary, or were medieval folks more forgiving of a crooked tunic? You can almost hear scholars bickering over a half-rotted sleeve dug from a bog. The master makes another cut, his hand steady, his body leaning with the motion. The apprentices hold their breath, as though one wrong slip might unravel the cosmos. Snip, snip, crunch, whisper. The pieces fall away like puzzle fragments, littering the bench in curious shapes, wedges, crescents, long strips. To your eyes, they barely resemble clothing. Yet he gathers them in an orderly stack, confident that the seams will tell their own story once needle and thread join the puzzle. You notice how nothing goes to waste. Even the smallest scraps are tucked into a basket. These might become linings, patches, or stuffing for cushions. In a world where fabric costs a small fortune, every fiber matters. Waste isn't just careless. It's insulting to the weaver who spun, the dyer who colored, the shepherd who tended the flock. Every cut is therefore sacred, every edge part of a larger economy of hands. And here's a sensory quirk for you. The smell. Cutting wool releases a faint, warm odor, lanolin mixed with sheep's musk, that lingers in the workshop. Linen smells grassy when cut, almost like hay, while silk gives off almost no scent at all, ghost-like and slippery. The apprentices sniff unconsciously, their noses learning the difference the way modern sommeliers inhale a glass of wine. You do the same, realizing that fabric has a voice not only in texture and sound, but in smell too. The master finishes a sleeve and lays the shears down with a clunk. His fingers trace the edge, checking the curve as though it were flesh, not cloth. One apprentice dares to ask if the sleeve will fit. The master chuckles, a deep rumble. If the body is honest, the sleeve is honest, he says cryptically. You roll your eyes. Translation: it'll fit because he says it will fit. Confidence is measurement. How medieval is that? But to be fair, there's skill beneath the swagger. He's cut thousands of garments, each informed by body memory and tradition. His mind holds a living library of proportions. How much shoulder slope a peasant's tunic needs, how long a knight's surcoat should fall, how wide a merchant's belly demands. He doesn't need a measuring tape. He has history embedded in his fingertips. The apprentices try their hand. Their cuts wobble, jagged, like a child's attempt at paper dolls. One piece comes out too narrow, another too long. The master snatches them up, mutters curses under his breath, then shows how to correct. Slivers can be patched, excess trimmed, symmetry restored by sleight of hand. Tailoring is part art, part salvage operation. By the end, the bench is covered in pieces, front panels, back panels, sleeves, collars, gussets. They look like scattered continents, a cartographer's nightmare. But the master smiles faintly. To him, they already resemble a garment in embryo. All that remains is to stitch the pieces together, to coax shape from scraps. You glance at the apprentices, chalk dust on their cheeks, charcoal smudges on their aprons, fingers nicked from blades too sharp for their clumsy grip. They look exhausted, but oddly proud, like they've just participated in something timeless. And in a way, they have. You catch yourself drifting, imagining your own scissors at home, flimsy things compared to these iron beasts. Next time you trim fabric, you'll hear the echo of snip, snip, crunch, whisper. You'll remember this workshop, and how clothing begins not with a machine's hum, but with the deliberate rhythm of iron jaws closing on cloth. The pieces lie scattered across the table like bones waiting for assembly, yet the master tailor does not rush to sew them. Instead, he reaches for something simple, plain lengths of thread, a needle thick enough to pierce stubborn wool, and a quiet confidence that suggests he's done this dance more times than he's eaten bread. You lean in, expecting him to leap straight into permanent stitches, but instead, he begins with something humbler, tacking. Tacking is the tailor's rehearsal. Long, loose stitches hold the pieces together just enough to form shape, but not enough to last. They can be pulled out easily, unraveled in seconds, like chalk dust swept from a board. With each tack, the master explains and mutters. Try it, see if it sits, fix it if it doesn't. In other words, a medieval prototype. Imagine a whole shirt held together by little more than borrowed patience. You watch as the front panel joins the back. The sleeves dangle precariously, the collar flaps loose like a dog's ear. The garment is not clothing yet. It's a skeleton with thread for sinew. The apprentices giggle when the thing looks absurd, more scarecrow than shirt, but the master silences them with a glare. He knows the importance of the ugly stage, the half-born shape that allows imagination to test itself. Mainstream historians agree. Temporary stitches were vital in tailoring before measuring tapes. Without them, there was no safe way to test proportions. Even noble clients were sometimes summoned to fittings where they donned garments full of dangling threads, the tailor circling like a hawk, tugging here, adjusting there. It was a process both practical and faintly comical. Here comes your quirky tidbit. There's record of tailors using not just thread for tacking, but even horsehair, its stiffness making it easier to pull out later. Picture yourself walking around in a half-made tunic bristling with horsehair seams. Comfortable? Absolutely not. But effective? Apparently so. Yet debates linger. Historians still argue whether all garments were tacked first, or whether experienced masters sometimes skipped straight to permanent stitches. Some suggest that speed was crucial. Tailors were paid by the job, not by the hour. Others insist that no one would risk expensive cloth on a hunch. The arguments hang unresolved, much like the loose stitches themselves. The master motions for an apprentice to hold the half-garment up. The boy slips it onto his shoulders, sleeves drooping almost to his knees. The room bursts into muffled laughter until the master hushes them. He studies the fit, pinches fabric at the armpit, tugs at the hem, and marks adjustments with swift chalk slashes. He mutters corrections the way a sculptor chips at marble, tiny refinements that, multiplied, shape something human. You notice the rhythm of the room. Needle slides, thread tugs, chalk squeaks, scissors click. The soundscape is as steadying as rain on a roof. You let it wash over you, eyelids drooping, until the master's bark of command snaps you back. One apprentice has stitched a seam too tightly, puckering the cloth. The master rips it out with dramatic ferocity, thread flying like snapped spiderwebs. Then, more calmly, he demonstrates again, loose, light, forgiving. Tacking is humility in motion. There's a smell of warmed wool as the half-garment is handled, the lanolin releasing under busy fingers. Sweat beads on foreheads, chalk dust clings to eyelashes, and somewhere a kettle boils faintly, promising tea no one has time to drink. You almost want to step forward and take the needle yourself, to feel the tug of thread, the slow assembly of chaos into order. But the apprentices have that privilege. One boy, hands shaking, manages to tack a sleeve with only 2 knots. Another struggles, stabbing his finger until a bead of blood stains the hem. The master sighs but doesn't scold. Blood, it seems, is an unspoken offering to the garment. You smirk at the thought. Made with 10% wool, 90% apprentice tears. The pinned-together shirt now resembles something wearable, albeit lopsided and crude. The master adjusts, tugging here, smoothing there, until it hangs reasonably straight. He circles it like a judge at a contest, nodding slowly. It is not perfection, but it is possibility. And in this workshop, possibility is the most valuable currency. The apprentices stare, wide-eyed. For them, the magic is not in the final garment, but in this moment, the first glimpse of cloth becoming clothing. The master's face softens, just a little. He knows they must learn not just to cut, but to tack, to test, to fail gently before sewing firmly. This stage teaches humility, patience, and the understanding that mistakes are part of creation, not shameful interruptions. You, too, find yourself oddly reassured. Your own world often worships efficiency, the straight line from design to product. But here, the crooked stitch, the temporary knot, the willingness to test and undo, these are virtues. It feels almost therapeutic, the idea that imperfection is expected, that failure is part of the pattern. The master finally nods, snipping the last tack thread with his iron shears. The skeleton shirt droops on its stand, tired but triumphant. He steps back, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in satisfaction. The apprentices exhale, as though they'd been holding their breath the whole time. And you, drifting on the hum of the workshop, feel the gentle lull of inevitability. The shirt is coming alive, one loose stitch at a time. The skeleton garment hangs awkwardly, its seams loose, threads dangling like cobwebs. The master tailor folds his arms and squints, but instead of reaching for his needle, he calls for a different tool, the iron. Not the sleek, electric box you're used to, but a hefty lump of forged metal, its handle wrapped in cloth to protect against burns. It sits waiting by the hearth, already glowing faintly from the coals. One apprentice, clearly the unlucky one, is ordered to fetch it. He waddles over with tongs, the iron radiating heat that shimmers in the air. He sets it on the bench with a thunk, and the master tests its warmth by spitting lightly on the surface. The spit sizzles into nothing. Approval granted. He grips the handle, face grim, and presses the iron onto the garment's seams. A hiss rises, followed by the smell of singed wool and faint smoke curling upward. The apprentices cough, but none dare look away. Here lies the secret most outsiders forget. Pressing was just as vital as stitching. Without it, seams refused to lie flat, hems buckled, and garments hung awkwardly. The medieval tailor didn't merely sew cloth together. He tamed it with fire and pressure, convincing it to behave. Pressing, in its own way, was negotiation. Mainstream accounts mention Tailors' irons often. They came in sets of different weights, each heated directly in the hearth. Lighter irons smoothed delicate linen, heavier brutes pressed wool into submission. A tailor's arm's strength mattered almost as much as his stitching skill. Pressing took endurance, patience, and occasionally a willingness to risk burned fingers. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some tailors sprinkled water, vinegar, or even beer onto cloth before pressing, believing the steam set seams more firmly. Imagine your shirt faintly smelling of ale every time it warmed in the sun. Some scholars even think this doubled as a mild disinfectant, clothes carrying not only warmth, but a faint pub aroma. Still, historians argue, did every tailor own irons, or were they luxuries limited to guild masters in wealthy towns? Some evidence suggests peasants' garments skipped pressing entirely, relying on wear to flatten seams naturally. Others claim that even the humblest village smith could hammer out a serviceable iron for the local tailor. The truth, as always, likely wavered between regions. The master demonstrates with practiced grace. He presses each seam flat, turning the garment slowly, muttering corrections under his breath. The iron leaves faint sheen lines on the wool, glowing in lamplight like the shimmer of a river stone. Apprentices watch wide-eyed, knowing that one slip could scorch the cloth beyond saving. Already the half-shirt looks more civilized, its chaotic edges subdued into crisp lines. You notice the rhythm. Hiss, thump, lift, shift. It's almost meditative, like watching waves lap ashore. The room grows warm, not just from the hearth, but from the iron's presence, radiating a steady heat that makes your eyelids heavy. You imagine lying beneath such an iron, its weight pressing you into calm oblivion, though you'd probably end up grilled like a panini. So maybe not the best bedtime experiment. The apprentices take turns under watchful eyes. One presses too long, leaving a scorched patch. Another lifts too quickly, failing to smooth the seam. The master shakes his head, then demonstrates again, slower, deliberate. You can almost hear him think, patience, wait, timing. Tailoring is as much about waiting as it is about working. The smell of scorched wool mingles with smoke, sweat, and chalk dust, creating an aroma that is oddly grounding. Not pleasant, exactly, but reassuring. It smells like effort, like process, like the birth of something useful. You picture your own clothes, sleek and factory finished, and feel a pang of loss. Nothing in your closet carries this aroma of fire and care. Once all seams are pressed, the master steps back, arms crossed. The garment is still rough, but it hangs straighter now, more cooperative. Pressing has given it discipline. The apprentices murmur, clearly impressed by how much difference heat and pressure can make. To them, it feels like alchemy, cloth transformed not by thread, but by fire. The master, perhaps sensing their awe, offers one of his cryptic nuggets. The iron is the second needle. You smile at the phrase. It's true. One needle binds, the other flattens, both equally vital. Without the second, the first is nothing more than knots. By the time the iron cools, the workshop smells of smoke and triumph. The garment rests quietly, seems obedient, as though it has accepted its fate. The apprentices look exhausted but proud, faces glowing with firelight and a little soot. And you, lulled by hiss and press, find your thoughts drifting, the steady rhythm of tailoring carrying you gently toward sleep. The garment, though still skeletal, is finally ready to be shaped against a body. The master tailor claps his hands, and the apprentices know what comes next, fittings. One groans quietly, because he knows he'll be the living mannequin yet again. He steps forward reluctantly, arms drooping, as the others chuckle under their breath. The half-stitched shirt slips over his shoulders. Loose threads tickle his neck, and the rough wool scratches his skin, but he doesn't dare fidget. The master circles him slowly, eyes sharp, hands quick to tug a seam here or pinch a fold there. The boy looks like a scarecrow in borrowed rags, but in the master's mind, this is where imagination and fabric collide. You can see why this stage mattered so much. Without tape measures, the only true test was flesh itself. The garment had to live on a body to prove whether it would drape or choke, cling or sag. Every apprentice learns quickly. The tailor's eye is sharp enough to catch a crooked seam from across the room. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that fittings were often public, sometimes taking place in guild halls or even open markets. Tailors needed the space, but they also needed to display their craft. Clients became walking advertisements, standing in their half-finished doublets while passers-by admired the cut. A clever tailor didn't just measure a man. He measured his social standing by letting everyone see who could afford bespoke clothes. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some tailors reportedly padded out apprentices with bundles of straw to mimic wealthier clients. If a merchant had a particularly large belly, the poor boy chosen as mannequin got stuffed until he resembled a sack of grain. You imagine the itchy rustle of straw shifting under wool, and the giggles suppressed in the background. But historians still argue whether fittings were done for every customer. Some scholars suggest that poorer folk simply accepted looser garments, stitched quickly and without adjustment, while others insist that even peasants had crude fittings, at least to prevent chafing during work. The debate lingers like an unfinished seam. The master continues circling his apprentice mannequin. He smooths the shoulder seams, frowns at the sleeve length, then yanks a thread with his teeth to loosen a hem. He mutters to himself, "Too tight here, slack there." And the apprentices scurry to chalk marks wherever his fingers land. His hands are rough but strangely gentle, almost like a doctor probing for hidden aches. You watch closely, noticing how every gesture reflects years of practice. He doesn't measure the sleeve with numbers. He pulls the apprentice's arm up, checks how much cloth rides toward the shoulder, then decides instinctively whether to shorten or lengthen. The hem, too, is tested not by rulers but by movement. Can the boy bend without flashing his knees? Can he walk without tripping? Practicality is measurement, and movement the only true gauge. The room grows quiet except for the rasp of chalk, the faint sighs of the mannequin apprentice, and the occasional hiss of disapproval from the master. The half-made shirt looks ridiculous, but you can see it transforming. Piece by piece, it's learning to fit, to become less fabric and more clothing. And you think of your own life, where sizes are stamped on tags, S, M, L, XL, imposed categories pretending to fit everyone. Here, there are no letters, no numbers. There is only this body, in this room, and the garment shaped to it like a second skin. Personal, intimate, imperfect, but uniquely true. The master finally steps back. He orders the boy to lift his arms, then squat, then twist as though hefting a sack. The shirt holds, awkward but serviceable. He nods. Good enough for the seam, he declares. The boy sighs in relief as the garment is tugged off, threads trailing like jellyfish tentacles. The apprentices carry it back to the bench, where it collapses into a limp heap. But you know what you just saw? The closest thing medieval tailors had to a measuring tape. A living body, an experienced eye, and a willingness to mark, unpick, and adjust until fabric agreed with flesh. The half-made shirt, tugged off the weary apprentice, is spread once again on the long table. It lies like some sleeping creature, waiting for its seams to be bound permanently. The master tailor rolls up his sleeves, sets aside the chalk, and threads his needle with a strand longer and stronger than the ones used for tacking. The apprentices straighten their backs. This is the moment where the ghost of a garment becomes flesh. Stitching, you realize, is a performance. The master begins with broad, sweeping motions, drawing thread through the cloth in neat, even bites. The needle dips in, rises out, dips in again, as steady as a heartbeat. He hums under his breath, some tune you don't recognize, and the apprentices soon match their own hand movements to his rhythm. In the quiet, the sound of sewing dominates. A faint hiss of thread sliding, the occasional pop as the needle punches through a dense seam. Mainstream accounts confirm that medieval stitches varied depending on purpose. Running stitches for quick joins, back stitches for strength, whip stitches for edges, blanket stitches for hems. Every tailor carried this vocabulary in his fingers, choosing the right phrase for each seam. Without measuring tape, consistency came not from numbers, but from muscle memory. You can see it now in the master's work. Each stitch nearly identical in size, as if his hand carries a built-in ruler. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found garments reinforced with stitches in bright-colored threads, never meant to be seen. They were secret rainbows hidden inside seams, visible only to the tailor and whoever repaired the garment later. Some believe it was a way to mark one's handiwork, like a signature only insiders could appreciate. Imagine discovering your shirt has a secret scarlet seam running under the armpit, a little joke between you and a long-dead craftsman. Still, historians argue about how much time tailors spent perfecting stitches. Some insist garments were sturdy but rough, sewn quickly to meet demand. Others point to surviving pieces that show tiny, meticulous work, evidence of pride and precision. Was the average medieval shirt crude or refined? The debate continues, and the truth likely shifted with the wealth of the customer and the temperament of the tailor. The apprentices practice nearby, their stitches crooked, uneven, too tight or too loose. One pulls his thread so hard the fabric puckers into little ridges. Another forgets to knot properly, and the seam unravels with one tug. The master shakes his head but lets them fail, correcting only after they've made enough mistakes to feel the lesson deep in their fingers. You catch the faint smirk on his lips. Patience may be his cruelest stitch. You notice how the process demands more than skill. It demands presence. There's no rushing, no skipping ahead. Each stitch is deliberate, a meditation in motion. As you watch, you start to feel your own breathing align with the tailor's rhythm. Inhale as the needle dips, exhale as the thread pulls through. The steady repetition lulls you, like waves pulling across sand. It's not just sewing, it's hypnosis by fabric. The master occasionally pauses to lick the thread's end, to knot carefully, or to press a seam flat with his thumb. These little interruptions break the monotony, just enough to keep focus sharp. He warns the apprentices. A seam remembers every mistake. Stitch wrong once, and it pulls crooked forever. You shiver at that thought, clothes carrying the memory of your errors long after you're gone. The garment begins to resemble itself more fully. The front and back panels are no longer strangers, but siblings joined at the shoulder. Sleeves grow like branches, stitched into armholes with slow, deliberate care. Gussets, those small triangular inserts, are slipped in to give ease of movement, the medieval equivalent of a hidden stretch panel. Piece by piece, the shirt takes its first true breath. The apprentices handle smaller seams, their stitches clumsy but improving. Their faces shine with sweat, and their fingertips redden from needle pricks. A few swear under their breath when they jab too deep, but the master ignores them. Pain, apparently, is part of the curriculum. You almost laugh at the sight. A room full of boys learning patience, one puncture wound at a time. The light in the workshop dims as dusk creeps closer, but no one moves to stop. Candles are lit, their flames reflecting off the needles, each spark a tiny star guiding the work. The shadows deepen, but the rhythm does not falter. The garment grows sturdier, it seems tighter, its silhouette clearer. What was once loose and uncertain now has strength. And you feel yourself sinking deeper into the rhythm, lulled by the whisper of thread and the glow of firelight. You imagine your own heartbeat stitched into the garment, each thump of your chest echoed in the pull of thread. By the time the master ties off his final knot for the evening, the shirt seems almost alive, as though waiting for someone to wear it and give it purpose. The half-finished shirt hangs on a wooden peg overnight, its seams still warm from the day's work. When morning comes, the apprentices rise before the sun, rubbing sleep from their eyes and returning to the workshop. The smell of smoke, wool, and yesterday's sweat lingers in the air. They set their stools back in place, needles threaded, cloth smoothed, and soon the slow heartbeat of sewing resumes. Now comes the detail work, edges and hems. The master insists that strength alone is not enough. A shirt must endure daily wear, tugging, washing, and weather. He demonstrates hemming with quiet authority, folding raw fabric edges inward, trapping loose threads so they cannot fray. Each hem is a line of defense against time. Watching closely, you notice how the hem is not just practical but elegant, the folded edge creating a smooth finish that seems almost sculptural. Medieval sources mention that hems were often double-folded, not once but twice, for added durability. It was a clever solution when fabric was precious. Better to sacrifice a narrow strip to hemming than lose the whole garment to unraveling. Archaeologists, when examining centuries-old linen fragments, can still find the folded hems intact long after the main cloth has thinned to lace. The hem, you realize, is the garment's memory, the part that outlives the rest. A curious fact, some tailors left hidden messages inside hems. Scraps of parchment with prayers, charms against evil, or even the name of the person who sewed it. These secret inclusions were never meant to be seen, only carried. Was it superstition, pride, or simply a way of whispering, "I was here into the future"? The thought unsettles you. You wonder what this master might slip into the hem today. Something for you to stumble upon centuries later. But history disagrees again. Some argue that such inclusions were rare, isolated cases, not a common custom. Others suggest they were widespread, part of a magical worldview where even clothes required spiritual armor. Without evidence, the argument drifts unresolved. Still, as you watch the apprentices roll hems under candlelight, you half expect one of them to smuggle a charm into the fold. The master moves next to the neck opening, shaping it carefully with a facing strip to keep it from stretching. This is delicate work. The collar frames the face, and if cut or sewn poorly, it betrays the whole garment. His fingers guide the cloth with reverence, as though handling something alive. The apprentices attempt the same, their necklines wobbling like crooked smiles. He allows their mistakes to remain, muttering that failure is a stricter tutor than he could ever be. Once collars and cuffs are in place, the workshop turns to reinforcement. Gussets at the armpits and slits at the sides are strengthened with small, neat stitches. These little zones, often ignored by the eye, bear the greatest strain of movement. Without reinforcement, the shirt would tear within weeks. It's a lesson in humility. The strongest garments depend not on visible showpieces, but on invisible care. Here's a charming tidbit. Inventory sometimes listed extra shirts not as spare clothing, but as spare skin. Clothes were thought of as a second body, protecting the first. A reinforced shirt was not merely fabric. It was armor for the soft human frame. Some theologians even drew moral parallels. Just as the soul needed reinforcement through prayer, the shirt needed hidden stitches to survive its trials. You can't help but smile at the poetry of that analogy. Still, scholars wrestle with whether ordinary folk took such care. Was this level of detail reserved for the wealthy? Did peasants' shirts fray unchecked while nobles enjoyed hems and gussets? Surviving evidence is sparse, and debates rage over how widespread such craftsmanship truly was. Perhaps both truths coexisted. Rough shirts for some, finely detailed ones for others. History rarely offers a single seam. By afternoon, the shirt looks undeniably whole. The hem runs smooth, the neckline neat, the cuffs firm. The apprentices stare at it with pride, though their own attempts still resemble lopsided cousins. Their fingers are pricked raw, yet their faces glow. For them, this is more than sewing. It is a passage into a craft that binds generations together. The light fades once more, and the workshop glows golden under candlelight. The shirt, now hanging from its peg again, seems transformed. Yesterday it was a patchwork of panels. Today it is a body waiting for a soul. Tomorrow, perhaps, it will live its first life on the back of someone who never gives a thought to the stitches that hold it together. And you feel the pull of the hemline like a closing eyelid, folding, tucking, sealing. The steady repetition, the quiet hum of thread through cloth, presses on your senses. Each hem whispers closure, finality, containment. You drift with it, as though your own edges are being folded neatly into rest. The shirt no longer looks like a puzzle of panels. It hangs with a certain gravity, its body finished, its seams pressed with the warm touch of hands and candle flame. Yet anyone in the room can see. It is naked without its final flourishes. The master tailor steps back, arms folded, as if admiring a painting. Then he nods once and announces it is time for finishing touches. The apprentices, weary but excited, straighten their spines. He begins with ties. No buttons yet. Those are for centuries to come. Instead, he pulls from a chest a bundle of linen cords, already twisted and waxed. You watch as he threads one through the neckline, creating a fastening that can be tied loosely or snug, depending on the weather or the wearer's mood. The cord whispers through the cloth, and when he knots it, the shirt suddenly feels more human, more personal. A shirt without closure is an unfinished thought. With ties, it becomes a sentence. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that ties, laces, and points were the standard for fastening medieval garments. They were cheap, flexible, and easily replaced. A shirt's ties might even double as emergency shoelaces, or be borrowed to repair a broken harness strap. One quirky tidbit. Some tailors were known to braid horsehair into cords, believing it made them stronger and less likely to snap. Imagine the subtle tickle of horsehair scratching your throat. Practical, yes, but hardly comfortable. Now the master gestures toward embroidery. Not lavish gold work reserved for dukes, but a whisper of color. An apprentice sets to work with a needle and silk thread, tracing small geometric shapes around the collar. They are not loud, just enough to suggest care. Decorative touches mark the shirt as something more than utility. They whispered affection, identity, and sometimes status. Red thread was common, not only because it looked striking against white linen, but because many believed red protected against illness or evil spirits. Wearing a shirt stitched with red at the collar was like carrying a hidden talisman. Here lies a debate, though. Historians still argue whether this embroidery was mostly functional reinforcement or deliberate ornament. Did people decorate collars primarily to strengthen the cloth, with beauty as a side effect? Or was beauty the main point, with durability an afterthought? The answer shifts depending on which fragment you examine, which manuscript you read. The truth is probably tangled in both threads. The apprentices lean close, practicing small motifs on scraps of linen. Their stitches wobble like the uncertain strokes of children learning letters. The master lets them falter. A crooked line teaches more than a perfect one. Meanwhile, you notice how embroidery turns sewing into rhythm, in out-pull knot. The motions are hypnotic, as though the shirt itself hums while being dressed in its final skin. Decoration, of course, went beyond thread. Some shirts bore small pleats at the neckline or wrists, creating tiny ripples that caught the light. Others had edging with contrasting fabric, narrow strips of dyed wool or patterned bands cut from older garments. Recycling was not shameful, it was expected. A strip from grandmother's apron might live again as a cuff, its history folded into a new story. There's a quirky record of a tailor who stitched coins into hems as ornament. Not many, just a few, flashing like secret mirrors when the shirt moved. Was it vanity? Or a way to keep money close, hidden in plain sight? You can picture it. A merchant tugging at his cuff in a crowded market, the faint gleam of silver betraying his little trick. By twilight, the shirt glows with its new dignity. The ties dangle like quiet invitations. The embroidery blushes faintly under the candlelight. The hems are smooth, the cuffs neat, the collar ready to frame a face. It no longer seems like a garment of necessity. It is a garment of presence. You feel that if someone slipped it on now, it would begin breathing on its own. The apprentices run their fingers over the embroidery, whispering comparisons, laughing when their uneven stitches betray them. The master, for all his gruffness, allows a smile. The shirt is not just a shirt, it is a lesson, a story, a continuation of craft. He reminds them that their work will outlive them, that even a humble shirt might hang in a chest long after its maker is dust. Clothes, he says, are ghosts that walk beside us. And as the night deepens, you sense that truth in the flicker of thread against linen. The finishing touches are not merely practical, they are echoes of personality, culture, even superstition. They are the little choices that turn survival into style, necessity into meaning. The shirt is ready now, waiting for its first breath of life outside this workshop. The shirt is ready, hanging on its peg like a sentinel, but the tailor is not done with you yet. He gestures for you to sit, to hold still, and with a half-smile, he begins what every apprentice dreads, fitting. He lifts the shirt carefully, not as if it were fragile, but with the respect you'd show to a newborn. The linen rustles softly, cool against his hands. He pulls it over your head, and the cloth settles on your shoulders. It smells faintly of beeswax and smoke, the sense of the workshop now wrapped around your body. The apprentices lean forward, their eyes bright, eager to see how well their measurements held up. The fit is surprisingly close. The sleeves fall neatly to your wrists, the shoulders rest without strain, and the ties at the collar dangle in a tidy bow. The tailor circles you, tugging here, pinching there, humming under his breath. His hands are brisk, almost clinical, yet you feel strangely on display, as though he's reading you in cloth rather than words. Mainstream accounts tell us fittings were a crucial stage in tailoring, especially for wealthier clients who demanded precision. A garment wasn't simply sewn and delivered, it was tested, adjusted, and shaped to the living body. That process was often repeated several times, with the tailor noting changes in posture, weight, or even fashion. The shirt you wear now is not just a shirt, it's a second skin being tuned like an instrument. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors would literally mark adjustments on the shirt while it was being worn, pricking the fabric with needles, or even snipping small cuts as guides. Imagine standing perfectly still while sharp blades hovered millimeters from your ribs. You hold your breath at the thought, and sure enough, the master produces a pair of shears, snapping them in the candlelight before clipping a sliver of fabric at your cuff. The apprentices grin knowingly. but scholars debate the level of perfection expected. Historians still argue whether everyday folk had their clothes fitted at all, or whether this meticulous process was a luxury for nobles and guild members. Did peasants simply accept baggy shirts, or did every town tailor aim for elegance regardless of class? Some say fit was a privilege. Others insist it was a point of pride no craftsman could ignore. The silence of records leaves the question swaying, like a loose hem in the breeze. The master steps back, squinting. He murmurs something about balance, the way the cloth drapes evenly across your chest, the straight line of the hem as it brushes your thighs. He explains that a shirt must not fight its wearer. It should move with you, bend when you bend, rest when you rest. A poor fit is a constant quarrel. A good fit is an unspoken truce. You raise your arms, and the gussets stretch without complaint. You twist, and the seams hold firm. The apprentices clap softly, relieved. The master, however, isn't satisfied. He tugs at the neckline, mutters about it sitting too high, and in one swift motion, he plucks a needle from his sleeve and makes a quick adjustment. The thread flashes in the candlelight, and suddenly the collar relaxes. It feels as if the shirt has exhaled with you. You realize how intimate this whole process is. The tailor sees your shape, your stance, your quirks. He notices the way you slouch slightly, the breadth of your shoulders, the tilt of your chin. He translates these human habits into folds and seams. In a way, he knows you better than most. Your shirt becomes a mirror of you, not an abstract measurement, but a lived truth in cloth. As the fitting continues, your body grows heavy with the repetition. Raise your arm, lower it. Turn left, turn right. The tailor's voice drones softly, the apprentice's needles clicking faintly as they mimic his corrections on scraps. You find yourself lulled, almost hypnotized, by the rhythm of adjustments. It is like being sculpted, sanded, smoothed, your edges filed down until fabric and flesh breathe together. The final test comes when the master orders you to walk the length of the workshop. You shuffle past the long table, past the open chest of cords, past the window where moonlight now streams. The shirt follows your body without fuss, swinging gently at the hem. You feel both clothed and free, as though the garment is not pressing against you but floating with you. The apprentices exhale in unison. The master gives a single nod. The shirt, he declares, is finished. But in truth, it is you who have been shaped. You stand straighter now, more aware of the weight and grace of cloth. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that fitting is not about vanity, it is about harmony. And harmony, once stitched, is hard to forget. The candles burn low. The shirt rests against your skin, warm now, as if alive. You close your eyes for a moment, and the world contracts into the soft whisper of linen, the faint scratch of thread, the hum of needles stitching not just fabric, but the rhythm of medieval life. The workshop is quieter now, the shirt hanging completed, fitted, and approved. But the tailor isn't ready to let you wander away just yet. He gestures for you to follow him out of the shop, into the narrow, twisting lanes of the town. The apprentices trail behind, carrying bundles of cloth scraps and their ever-present cords. It's market day, and today you'll see another part of a tailor's life. How patterns traveled not through books or measurements, but through bodies. The streets are thick with sound. Hawkers calling about salted fish, children running with sticky hands, dogs barking at chickens. Stalls overflow with bolts of rough-spun linen, shimmering silks from the south, and coarse wool from the hills. The tailor leads you toward a cluster of men and women gathered near the well, their clothes a patchwork of styles. Some wear tunics belted high, others long gowns dragging in dust, and a few wear garments so patched you wonder if any original cloth remains. This is his secret library, not scrolls, not paper, but people. He watches them closely, eyes sharp. He studies the slope of a merchant's sleeve, the drape of a traveler's cloak, the width of a farmer's collar. Every garment becomes a lesson. He doesn't need diagrams. He needs bodies in motion. You realize this is how knowledge of fit and fashion spread, from one town to the next, through observation and imitation. Mainstream historians agree that tailors learned much from watching people. Patterns weren't standardized in books. Not yet. They were absorbed visually. A clever tailor could measure with his eyes, remembering the swing of a skirt or the cut of a doublet, then reproduce it later at his table. That skill, passed down apprentice to apprentice, became as valuable as any tool. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors carried small pieces of wax tablets, scratching quick sketches of garments they saw in marketplaces, almost like medieval street-style note-taking. Imagine them crouching near a stall, pretending to study apples while secretly drawing the neckline of a passing noblewoman. Fashion espionage at its most humble. And yet, there's a scholarly debate here too. Historians still argue whether most tailors had the freedom to adapt what they saw, or if guild regulations kept them chained to rigid, approved designs. Were they innovators, or mere repeaters of tradition? Evidence points both ways. In some towns, guilds enforced strict patterns. In others, innovation blossomed in hidden corners of the market. The tailor points out details to his apprentices as you all wander. He pinches a sleeve between his fingers, murmuring about how wide it falls. He tugs at the hem of a friend's cloak, laughing as he admires the workmanship. Every gesture becomes a tiny lesson. His apprentices nod furiously, their eyes darting like birds, memorizing everything they can. You notice how patterns flow like gossip. A pilgrim from far away passes through, his coat cut differently, his hood longer. The apprentices whisper, then sketch the idea in dust with their fingertips. A few weeks from now, you imagine, half the town will wear hoods just like his. Fashion here is not decreed from above. It drifts like pollen, carried by eyes and hands. Suddenly, you realize something unsettling. You, too, are being measured. As you walk through the square, villagers glance at your newly fitted shirt, noting its drape, its ties, its subtle embroidery. Someone tugs a friend's sleeve, pointing. Someone else leans closer for a better look. Without meaning to, you've become part of the tailor's moving library. Your shirt is no longer yours alone. It is a pattern seed, ready to sprout elsewhere. The apprentices grin knowingly. This is how fashion circulates, not by rules, but by curiosity, envy, imitation. One shirt becomes two, two become 10, and soon a whole town wears echoes of one tailor's work. Patterns, you realize, are contagious. The tailor finally claps his hands, satisfied. His apprentices lug their scraps home, their pockets heavy with invisible sketches. You return to the workshop, your head buzzing. The shirt on your back feels heavier now, as though carrying not only its seams and hems, but the weight of future copies, future echoes. As night falls, you lie awake in your bedchamber above the shop, listening to the muffled chatter of the street below. Every voice, every footstep, every rustle of cloth feels like part of the same great loom, weaving bodies into patterns, patterns into memory. The tailor has taught you a strange truth. In this world, every passerby is a book, every shirt a manuscript, every stitch a story waiting to be read. The next morning, the tailor pulls you from your cot with no ceremony. His apprentices are already bustling, carrying bolts of cloth to the shop front. Today, he explains, is about display, how tailors advertise their skill without a single printed sign or glossy catalog. In a town without measuring tapes, it wasn't enough to know how to cut and sew. You had to prove you could see and be seen. The workshop door swings open, and light pours in. One apprentice hangs a finished gown on a peg outside. Another drapes a cloak across the doorframe, while a third carefully pins a child's tunic so its sleeves flutter in the breeze. This is their advertisement. Not words, not promises, but cloth alive with movement. Anyone walking by can see at a glance what the tailor can do. Mainstream historical accounts describe how medieval tailors often used mannequins of wood or straw, but just as often they used living bodies. Apprentices, or even family members, would parade through the marketplace wearing the latest creations, walking slowly, letting the fabric speak for itself. Imagine it as a medieval runway, awkward, dusty, but strangely effective. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, apprentices were known as walking signs. They'd wear bright new doublets or finely cut gowns, strolling conspicuously through taverns and squares. Everyone knew those clothes weren't theirs, but it hardly mattered. Their bodies became moving billboards, announcing the tailor's skill. One chronicler even complained that tailors' boys cluttered the market like peacocks, strutting with borrowed feathers. And yet, historians still argue whether this practice was universal or limited to wealthier towns. Did every tailor show off their work this way, or only those with enough apprentices to spare? Some scholars believe poorer tailors relied solely on word of mouth, while others suggest even the humblest shop had its peacock moments. The truth, as usual, is tangled in missing records. The master decides today you'll join the show. Before you can protest, he thrusts a freshly finished tunic into your arms. Heavier than your shirt, dyed a soft madder red that gleams warmly in the sun. The apprentices help you pull it on, adjusting the collar, tugging the belt tight. Suddenly you feel less like a guest and more like a mannequin, your body transformed into a canvas. He marches you outside. The marketplace is already humming, stalls crowded with customers. As you step into the square, conversations pause. Heads turn. The red tunic blazes against the dust and gray stone, as though you've carried a torch into the daylight. You flush with embarrassment, but the tailor beams. This is the point, to be noticed. He makes you walk in circles, pivoting, raising your arms so everyone can see the drape, the movement, the clever gussets at the sides. A group of women selling onions nudge each other, whispering. A merchant strokes his beard, eyes lingering on the cuffs. Children giggle, tugging their mother's sleeves, begging for clothes like that. The apprentices grin from the doorway, clearly enjoying your discomfort. And yet, something strange happens. As you stride, self-conscious at first, you begin to notice how the fabric moves with you. The tunic doesn't feel like a costume anymore. It feels alive, tuned to your shape. Each step sends ripples of cloth around your legs. Each turn catches the light. You realize you're not just displaying the tunic is displaying you. The tailor, seeing this, nods approvingly. That is the trick, he whispers. Clothes sell themselves best when they make the wearer forget they are being worn. A perfect garment disappears into the body, yet somehow makes the body more visible. That's the paradox of tailoring. As the day wanes, orders begin to trickle in. A baker asks for shirts like yours, but with deeper hems. A farmer requests a tunic cut wider for easier movement in the fields. A wealthy merchant, impressed by the red cloth, promises to return with coin enough for a full gown. The tailor smiles tightly, satisfied. His gamble has paid off. Later, back in the workshop, he strips the tunic from you, folds it carefully, and tucks it away. The apprentices chatter excitedly about how many commissions they'll have to fill. You, still flushed from the experience, sit quietly. You realize you've just been part of a centuries-old dance, not only of sewing and cutting, but of showing and selling. The tailor's art is not complete until it's seen by others, until fabric turns into desire. As the candles burn low, you think back on the day. The memory of walking the square in red lingers in your body. You hear again the whispers, see again the merchant's thoughtful gaze, feel again the strange confidence of cloth hugging your frame. The tailor has taught you yet another lesson. Measurement is only half the story. The rest lives in the eyes of strangers. The next day begins with no cloth at all. Instead, the master tailor beckons you to a corner of the workshop where scraps of parchment, bits of charcoal, and half-worn wax tablets are scattered across a low bench. His apprentices huddle around, fidgeting with eager curiosity. You expect more cutting, more sewing, but today is about imagination. He tells them that before thread ever pierces cloth, a garment must exist first in the mind. No tailor can cut well if he cannot see the garment whole. So he teaches them the oldest of tricks, drawing patterns not with rulers or fancy paper, but with memory, chalk, and scraps. One apprentice flattens a tablet of beeswax on the bench, its surface dented with the ghost of earlier sketches. With a stylus, he scratches crude outlines. Rectangles for panels, triangles for gussets, a circle for a neckline. It looks like the doodles of a child, yet the master nods approvingly. From such crude maps, entire wardrobes can spring. Mainstream historians note that while printed pattern books only arrived much later, medieval tailors sometimes used wax tablets or chalkboards to sketch out garments, especially for teaching apprentices. These sketches weren't exact blueprints, but rough guides, a reminder of proportions, the way panels should join, or the order of stitching. Here's a quirky tidbit. There are references to tailors sketching directly onto workshop walls, tracing outlines in charcoal, then rubbing them away with cloth. Imagine walking into a tailor's shop and seeing its plaster walls covered in faint diagrams of shirts and hose, like a gallery of ghostly clothing. The walls themselves became the notebook. Still, historians argue about how common this practice was. Some claim only the wealthiest guild masters bothered with sketches, while others believe even rural tailors scratched patterns in dust on the floor, using a stick or even a fingertip. Historians still argue whether these early pattern sketching habits count as the beginnings of fashion design, or were just pragmatic reminders. The boundary between art and craft blurs here. The master demonstrates his own method. He lays a scrap of parchment flat, then measures out rough proportions with his cubit. His fingers, stained with dye, move quickly, shaping boxes and curves that hint at sleeves and collars. He doesn't bother with precision. He knows the cloth itself will dictate the final form. Instead, he teaches apprentices to see the body in flat shapes, to imagine how curves emerge from corners. You watch the apprentices copy him. Their sketches wobble, lines uneven, yet you sense the power in what they're doing. These marks are not the garments themselves, but shadows of garments. The master explains that to draw is to rehearse, better to make mistakes in wax than in wool. One apprentice grumbles, and the tailor smacks him lightly on the shoulder. Cloth is too expensive for trial and error. Imagination is free. As the lesson continues, you notice something soothing about the scratching of stylus on wax, the way lines curl and meet. The apprentices lean close, their breath fogging the tablet as they argue about the right shape for a gusset. They erase, redraw, argue again. The air hums with youthful stubbornness, yet the master watches calmly, letting them discover. Later, he sweeps the tablet clean with the flat of his palm, leaving only a faint smear of charcoal. He tells them that patterns should live not on parchment, but in the mind and body. Once learned, they must be carried everywhere, like songs or prayers. A true tailor, he insists, can sketch a shirt in the air with his hands, even without wax or chalk. The apprentices practice this too, waving their arms in the air, tracing invisible panels, pretending to fold and stitch phantom cloth. You almost laugh. It looks like they're conducting an orchestra, only they can hear. But you realize this is memory in motion. Their bodies are becoming pattern books. As the evening deepens, you feel yourself lulled by the rhythm of their gestures, the way lines turn into shapes, shapes into garments, garments into dreams. You picture medieval towns full of such invisible sketches, patterns traced in dust, in air, in imagination, then stitched into reality. And in that dim room, you understand another truth. Medieval tailoring was not just measurement and cutting, it was vision. The tailor sees what is not yet there, holds it in chalk and wax, then breathes it into cloth. The apprentices, tired but glowing, carry their wax tablets like relics. And you, half dreaming, carry the faint hum of shapes into your own drifting thoughts. The next morning you find the apprentices already hunched over the long table, muttering like monks over their beads. But instead of prayers, they're counting stitches, and instead of parchment, they're bent over scraps of wool. The master wants to move from imagined shapes to tangible practice, and today that means one thing: proportion drills. He orders them to cut test strips of cheap cloth, nothing fancy, just offcuts too small for real garments. Each strip must be the width of one palm, then 2 palms, then 3. The apprentices measure not with rulers but with their own bodies, lining strips against fingers, fists, forearms. You realize it's a kind of bodily mathematics, and suddenly the workshop feels like both a classroom and a gymnasium. The mainstream historical fact here: medieval apprentices were indeed drilled relentlessly in proportion exercises. Tailoring guilds required years of training before an apprentice could even cut cloth for a real client. Much of that training was repetition, measuring by hand, memorizing ratios of sleeve to shoulder, skirt to waist. It was less glamorous than dressing nobles, but it built the muscle memory that kept mistakes from ruining expensive fabrics. Here's a quirkier tidbit. In some towns, apprentices weren't allowed to touch expensive wool until they had mastered practice cloth made from hemp sacks or even repurposed grain bags. Imagine fashion school where your runway collection starts with a potato sack, humbling but practical. The master watches closely as each boy and girl lays out their strips, folding them, lining them up against arms and shoulders, then marking crude chalk lines for imaginary seams. He insists on silence. Only the swish of chalk, the soft rip of cloth being torn along grain lines. You notice how the apprentice's hands move with growing confidence, less hesitation, more rhythm. It's like watching dancers rehearse steps until the body remembers on its own. Yet, historians still argue whether such drills were standardized across guilds or improvised by individual masters. Some records hint that guilds kept strict proportion tables, memorized like catechisms, while others suggest each workshop developed its own secret formulas, passed down like family recipes. Was there a universal system, or just hundreds of local traditions stitched together across Europe? No one fully knows. The master breaks the silence with a sharp clap. He has the apprentices exchange strips. Each must now check another's work, holding cloth against their own bodies to see if the proportions translate. Some strips sag too wide, others pinch tight too narrow. There's good-natured groaning, a little laughter, even some mockery. But the lesson is clear. A tailor must think beyond his own body. Clothes must fit many shapes, not just his own. You can almost hear a modern voice in your head saying, "Isn't this just medieval algebra?" And in a sense, yes. The apprentices are learning ratios, but instead of numbers, they use limbs. Instead of symbols, they use chalk lines. Each scrap is a silent equation written in fabric. The master ups the challenge. He picks the tallest apprentice and orders the shortest one to make him a tunic panel. Gasps ripple across the room. How can a small frame imagine the proportions of a giant? But the boy squares his shoulders, lays cloth on the table, and begins. His hands tremble, but he forces himself to rely on rules. Half a cubit for the sleeve, 1 handspan for the neck opening, 2 palms for ease. When he's done, the master tests it against the tall apprentice. Shockingly, it works. A rough panel, but proportionate. The boy beams, his face flushed with triumph. And you, sitting in the corner, feel a little proud too. You've seen the invisible math at work, the way a tiny person can clothe a large one with nothing but ratios and courage. As dusk creeps in, the apprentices stack their practice strips in neat piles, chalk dust smudging their faces. They look exhausted but satisfied. The master dismisses them with a wave, but before you drift off, he mutters something almost to himself. A tailor's true gift is not in cutting cloth, but in cutting fear. And with that, the workshop fades into twilight, and you are left floating in the rhythm of palms, cubits, and scraps. Numbers without numbers, mathematics stitched into memory, proportion drills humming like lullabies. The next morning, the workshop hums with a different energy. The apprentices are awake earlier than usual, buzzing like small birds, because today is about speed. After weeks of slow, meticulous practice, the master believes it's time for them to test not only accuracy, but efficiency. A tailor must be both precise and swift. Clients rarely wait, and cloth is expensive. He sets a simple challenge. Cut and assemble a shirt from scraps in a single morning. No sketches, no wax tablets, no practice strips. Just the body, the cloth, and their growing intuition. The apprentices stare at the scraps, uncertainty flaring in their eyes. You can almost hear their thoughts. Where do I start? How do I measure? The master only smiles, watching them sweat. Mainstream sources note that speed drills were common in guild training. Tailors needed to work quickly because wealthy clients demanded timely delivery, and apprentices' wages often depended on output. Efficiency was part of their education, embedded alongside precision and proportion. The faster a tailor worked without compromising quality, the more valuable he became. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval guilds timed their apprentices with sundials, marking the beginning and end of a cutting challenge. If a boy finished too slowly, he was scolded. Too fast, and he risked sloppy seams. Imagine racing against the sun, scissors in hand, trying to turn cloth into something wearable before the light dips. Yet historians debate whether such timed drills were universal or symbolic, reserved for competitions and ceremonies. Some argue guilds focused more on skill than speed, while others point to records of contests where apprentices' pace determined whether they advanced. Historians still argue whether efficiency was always a pedagogical goal, or sometimes just a show of bravado. You watch the apprentices now, cloth in hand, measuring with fingers, elbows, even their own torso as reference. One boy cuts unevenly, another hesitates at a neckline, yet a third surprises everyone by assembling panels faster than expected. The master nods, approving some, adjusting others, his eyes constantly moving, reading every twitch, every line, every misstep. As they work, you notice the rhythm. Snip, fold, tuck, stitch. It's almost musical. Mistakes happen, but they're absorbed quickly, corrected mid-motion. You marvel at the speed with which their hands remember proportion, drape, and fit without consulting a ruler. Muscle memory is now the ruler, the tape measure replaced entirely by the body itself. By midday, the room smells faintly of warm wool and beeswax, dusted with chalk, peppered with small scraps of linen littering the floor. The apprentices hold up their completed shirts. Some are surprisingly neat, others a little lopsided, but all wearable. The master examines each one with keen scrutiny, tugging, twisting, checking armholes, necklines, and hems. Finally, he claps once, satisfied. Speed and accuracy, though not perfect, have been learned. And you, observing all this, realize that tailoring is not just craft. It is training in patience, intuition, and bodily mathematics. Today's exercise proves that the mind and hands can replace measuring tools. The human body is, after all, the first and most reliable instrument. As the workshop empties for the evening, the master sits alone with a single scrap of red cloth. He picks it up, rubs it between his fingers, and smiles faintly. You sense that beyond the drills and fittings, beyond the fashion and displays, there is something profoundly human in this work. A dialogue between hands, fabric, and imagination, stretching back centuries, stitched into memory. You wake to the low murmur of the workshop already split along a different axis. Not simply apprentices and masters, but a quieter, more stubborn line folding itself through the benches. Tailors on one side, seamstresses on the other. At first you think it's simple. Men cut cloth, women stitch it. But as you rub sleep from your eyes, the truth unravels into gossip, municipal charters, and practical cunning. Today the air tastes of old coffee and accusation. Someone at the market has been muttering that a seamstress down the lane knows better than the guild, and you find yourself oddly eager to see how that claim plays out. You watch because the quarrel is really about authority. Tailors claim the right to set patterns, keep the full bolts, and pronounce official sizes. Seamstresses claim the right to fit and adapt in private homes where bodies live, grow, and stain with stew. In a town with no measuring tape nailed to a post, both crafts stake their reputations on embodied knowledge. You stand half sleeping, as the argument becomes a lesson about how power and practice shape what people actually wear. A mainstream historical fact anchors the noise. Municipal and guild records show towns often litigated which artisans could make or alter specific garments. There are preserved council rulings where magistrates decided whether a woman's household might sell finished shirts or only mend them. Those dusty entries remind you garments were regulated commerce, not merely domestic comfort. The right to make an item could mean a right to steady income. But the paper doesn't capture the gossip. You overhear a juicy, quirky tale about a seamstress in a Flemish alley who taught her son a wrist measure trick, then opened a stall undercutting the guild by avoiding dues. The guild tailors, affronted, allegedly retaliated by producing mock doublets that fitted only the skinniest of apprentices, ridicule stitched into cloth. You smirk at the image. Apprentices squeezed awkwardly into garments meant as satire. Rumor, you realize, functions like a measuring tape too, shaping reputations and shifting markets faster than any posted ordinance. Methodology divides them. Tailors emphasize pattern and public authority. They cut panels from bolts, chalk lines on the bench, and keep ledgers of commissions stamped with guild marks. Seamstresses emphasize adaptability and the private encounter. They pin in parlors, repurpose old skirts as templates, and shape garments to bodies that move and bruise and grow. You watch a seamstress in the doorway lift a market woman's apron to judge a shoulder slope. Her fingers move like the master's, but softer, practiced and small, forgiving adjustments that make a garment survive daily life. Historians still argue whether such divisions were universal or highly local. In some towns, guild charters explicitly forbade women from selling certain sewn goods. In others, women formed confraternities or worked openly in market stalls. The archival record is patchy. Legal disputes make paper, quiet domestic practice usually does not. So scholars read absences, interpret wills, and quarrel over how representative a single court case can be. The fabric of evidence is frayed. Interpretation stitches it back together in different patterns. You witness the stakes in practice. Two customers arrive almost together. A courier whose doublet needs a swift patch, and a market woman needing a new bodice for harvest. The tailor steps forward, fingers flat on the courier's coat, and claims the repair is guild work. He'll charge a respectable fee, and his stamp will reassure the merchant. The seamstress beckons the market woman in, measures by eye where the hips widen and how the belt rides, offering a mend that costs half, and comes with a stitch that will survive bending to gather sheaves. You see who the poor prefer. You see who can afford the ledger's imprimatur. Practical choices reveal deeper differences. The seamstress often uses a client's own belt, an old skirt, or a child's sleeve as a template, improvisations that minimize waste and cost. The tailor will often insist on cutting fresh panels to ensure uniform grain and a tidy appearance, which appeals to wealthy customers and formal wardrobes, but uses more precious cloth. You watch a seamstress fold a mother's worn petticoat into a pattern and feel a little reverence. Resourcefulness is a kind of measurement too. The economy of information fascinates you. Seamstresses store measurements in social memory. Maria's boy needs an extra half hand by Michaelmas, someone says at the well, and the knowledge moves through the neighborhood. The tailor's ledger lists names and payments, neat rows that don't note the way a child's shoulders will broaden in a season. That living ledger, gossip balanced with sustained observation, becomes a communal measuring tape, flexible and forgiving where official records are blunt. Yet power often favors tailors. Guilds can fine undercutters, forbid apprentices from moonlighting, and charge fees that deter formal competition. When disputes hit the courtroom, the tailor's argument about standards and protecting the community's reputation finds sympathy. But practice bends law and necessity. During harvests and plagues rules slacken, seamstresses stitch soldier shirts, tailors take in mending for coin, and the lines blur when survival is at stake. You overhear a young apprentice insisting loudly that men's tailoring is mathematical. Measure once, cut true, as if precision were a sacred geometry. A matronly seamstress snaps back that his math is theory until a baby's hem rubs raw through a cold night. The banter sparks laughter, because both claims hold truth. Practicality and authority are different dialects of the same craft language. Each makes different demands on the body and wallet. Historians still argue whether gendered divisions restricted women's economic agency or whether seamstressing provided routes to influence. Some scholars emphasize guild exclusion and legal barriers. Others point to wills, inventories, and occasional court cases showing seamstresses who prospered, training daughters, inheriting tools, running workshops out of kitchens. The debate remains open mainly because domestic practice leaves fewer durable traces than guild chests and municipal ledgers. You step closer to see hands at work. the tailor's fingers pressing a doublet's shoulder with measurement habits embedded in muscle. The seamstress's fingers coaxing a child's cuff with an intimacy that reads the small rhythms of movement. The tailor shapes for display and public ordering. The seamstress shapes for comfort and daily hard labor. Both aims are correct, both necessary. You notice the subtle difference. One hand thinks in panels and public gaze, the other in folds that resist wear. Collaboration complicates the rivalry. Marriages between trade families blend pattern memory with household cunning. Apprentices shift between bench and hearth during lean winters and bring tricks back to the shop. A seamstress learns to cut a proper gore. A tailor learns to leave extra ease in a working mother's bodice. Borders are porous. Knowledge circulates like dye through cloth. The debate feels less like war and more like a long negotiation, an argument stitched into the town's social fabric. A minor dispute arrives at midday. A patron complains his sleeve, mended by a seamstress, is too tight. The tailor offers to inspect and unpicks the seam, resewing it to guild standards. The patron pays, praises him, and leaves with a straighter back. You see reputation as currency. Public certification often outvalues private thrift. The seamstress watches, cheeks flushed, knowing that trust once shaken is harder to restore than a ripped cuff. You pause at a board by the market where a faded notice lists fines and ordinances. Evidence towns tried to legislate taste as well as trade. You recall a recorded quarrel where a seamstress sued a tailor for slander after he accused her of stealing clients. The court ordered an apology, a small public correction, but the record shows how sharp words could become legal matters. Even a cuff can be litigated. Walking home beneath lamplight, you tuck that image into your pocket. The debate between tailor and seamstress will loop through this town, personal, pragmatic, persistent, but you sense its deeper truth. Whether measured by thumb or gossip, clothes are made by communities, not just by tools. You've seen cords and belts, thumbs and chalk, but most of all you've seen hands. Countless hands, shaping how people move, love, and survive. Evening settles over the workshop, but the day's lessons are far from done. The master motions you to the far corner, where a pile of old, frayed shirts waits for inspection. Today's exercise is about repair and adaptation, a skill every tailor and seamstress must master in a world without disposable clothing or fast fashion. You kneel beside the pile, fingers brushing worn linen, feeling the faint ridges where seams once held. The smell is faintly sour, a reminder of long wear, sweat, and repeated washings. The master picks up a particularly tattered shirt, threads dangling from a neckline torn by too many hurried pulls over a head. He holds it against you, showing how a single patch, carefully chosen and sewn, can restore life to a garment. Mainstream sources confirm that repair work occupied a significant portion of a medieval tailor's day, especially among those serving working families or townsfolk who could not afford new clothing. A well-patched shirt was prized. Every repair left visible evidence of care, skill, and the wearer's history. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors were known to embed small signature stitches into their repairs, tiny loops or knots in corners of patches that could identify the craftsman years later. Imagine discovering, decades after wearing a patched tunic, that a small flourish of thread reveals who saved it. Clothes, in this sense, were living records, stitched with stories. You start selecting patches, guided by the master. Cotton over linen, wool over silk. Choices are dictated by function and durability. He stresses symmetry and grain, explaining how the weave of a patch must align with the garment to prevent twisting or puckering. You realize that every stitch is both practical and aesthetic. Sloppy alignment can strain the cloth, but careful work prolongs its life. Historians still argue about the role of patchwork in fashion versus necessity. Were visible repairs merely practical, or did they become decorative statements? Some evidence suggests that vibrant patches, sometimes in contrasting colors, signaled cleverness or wealth. Others argue that patched clothing was primarily a matter of survival. Perhaps it was both, depending on town, era, and social standing. The apprentices take turns trying repairs themselves, learning the tactile memory of cloth. how much tension to apply, how to hide a seam, when to allow the patch to ripple subtly to follow movement. You try a patch yourself, feeling the weave resist your needle, and the master murmurs corrections in a soft, almost hypnotic rhythm. The workshop is filled with quiet effort, the tap-tap of needles, the hiss of thread being tightened, the occasional chuckle when a patch refuses to lie flat. He instructs you on a subtle technique: overlapping patches for reinforcement. Each layer absorbs stress, extending the garment's life. You notice that this method mirrors his broader philosophy. Layers of observation, memory, and intuition build clothing that can adapt to human life. A shirt isn't just stitched, it is engineered, nurtured, and kept alive through careful attention. By late afternoon, several shirts are transformed. Holes are hidden, torn panels are reinforced, and faded collars regain strength. Each garment now tells a story: the shapes of bodies, the rhythm of daily life, the creativity of repair. You can almost read histories in the fabric: the child who grew too fast, the mother who leaned over a hearth, the merchant who wore the cloth to market. As shadows lengthen, the master emphasizes another point: adaptation is not only repair but evolution. Sometimes sleeves must be shortened, hems adjusted, ties replaced, all to accommodate changing bodies or fashion. The apprentices nod, fatigued but attentive. You sense that survival in cloth, much like survival in life, requires flexibility, observation, and subtle cunning. Finally, he sets you aside for reflection. You run your hands over the patched garments, noticing how each alteration has preserved integrity while respecting wear. You realize that in a world without precise tools, without standard measurements, the ability to adapt, guided by experience, intuition, and careful observation, is more important than any ruler. And as dusk seeps through the window, the workshop settles into quiet, a soft hum of effort lingering in the air. The patched shirts stand as testimony to human ingenuity, memory stitched into cloth, the continuum of care passing from hand to hand, from body to body, across generations. You feel the subtle, almost sacred rhythm of the craft. Measure with your hands, mend with your eyes, preserve with your heart. The following morning carries a chill, the kind that creeps beneath the sleeves of a shirt and settles across the shoulders. The master announces a lesson in layering and insulation, a vital skill for anyone navigating medieval winters without heated homes. You shuffle through scraps of wool, linen, and coarse blends, realizing that each material has its own personality. Some stiff, some soft, some curling when handled. Today, he insists, you will learn to combine fabrics for warmth, comfort, and longevity. Layering is a surprisingly subtle art. Mainstream sources confirm that medieval clothing often involved multiple layers: a chemise or shirt, a tunic, sometimes a doublet or jerkin, and outer cloaks. The combination created insulation, mobility, and a buffer against harsh elements. Each layer must be measured and sized to complement the others, a delicate balance of fit and freedom. You watch as the master demonstrates how a woolen undertunic can support a linen shirt without bunching or sagging, how the seams must align to allow arms to lift without tugging the hem. A quirky tidbit surfaces as he drapes a particularly scratchy wool over your shoulders. Some tailors and household seamstresses reportedly stuffed additional layers of moss, straw, or even animal hair into garments for extreme cold. You shiver just imagining it, walking around with a shirt padded like a miniature hay bale. But in certain northern climates, survival demanded creative insulation. Historians still argue whether such natural fillings were common or anecdotal. Written records rarely survive, and the smell and decay of moss-stuffed undergarments would leave little trace. Yet experimental reenactors and surviving accounts suggest ingenuity was boundless when facing winter's bite. The apprentices gather around, pinning together layers of linen and wool, sometimes trimming panels to improve fit. The master emphasizes that the outer garment should carry weight lightly, and inner layers must breathe, allowing moisture to escape. You notice the choreography of layering. Each panel aligned, each cuff resting naturally, the ties of inner garments secured just so, invisible beneath the top layer. A poorly layered shirt can pinch, twist, or chafe, a lesson learned quickly when you raise your arm to stretch. Then the master demonstrates strategic ease, leaving tiny gaps or folds to allow growth and motion. A child's shirt might need extra inches at the waist and shoulders. A laborer's tunic requires slack at the elbows for swinging tools. The quirky part: some tailors reportedly left adjustable ties in hidden areas, so garments could expand subtly with growth or shrinking fibers. In effect, the clothes themselves could adapt to their wearer without needing constant alteration. You watch as the apprentices experiment, folding and stitching, layering and adjusting. They debate how much ease is enough, how to distribute warmth without bulk. One apprentice jokes that adding too many layers might make you look like a sausage, and everyone laughs. Yet the laughter masks a deeper lesson. Medieval tailoring balanced function, comfort, and sometimes humor, recognizing that clothing is lived experience as much as craft. The master steps back, holding up a layered shirt against the fading light. He points out the subtle alignment of seams, the smooth overlap of layers, the way each piece supports the next. You realize that mastery is less about creating one perfect garment and more about understanding interactions. Fabric to fabric, body to garment, eye to hand. Every layer communicates with the others, forming a system rather than a single object. As evening falls, the apprentices carefully fold their layered constructions, noting which combinations work best, which materials chafe, which adjustments feel right. You trace your fingers over your own layered shirt, appreciating how the fabric cradles your body. You understand now that fit, warmth, and mobility are inseparable. A garment must accommodate life in all its messy motions. The master finally dismisses everyone, leaving the room silent except for the soft whisper of fabric settling. You sit quietly, feeling the weight of knowledge, hands-on embodied, passed down through centuries without rulers or tape measures. The practice of layering, like the mastery of proportion and repair, is a rhythm carried in memory, intuition, and observation. The shirt you wear is no longer just fabric. It is an orchestration of function, history, and care, a silent story of human ingenuity stitched into every layer. The next day begins with a different sort of quiet intensity. The master has gathered scraps of cloth, buttons, ties, and small beads in a wide basket. Today's lesson is ornamentation, how medieval tailors made a garment speak beyond mere fit. You step closer, feeling the soft hum of sunlight spilling across the workbench, dust motes flickering like tiny stars. The master explains that embellishment is not vanity. It signals identity, status, and sometimes humor. You watch as he threads a needle, his fingers steady, the waxed thread glinting faintly. Mainstream historical records show that buttons, embroidery, and decorative stitching were integral to medieval tailoring, often more for show than for function. Certain stitches indicated guild membership. Elaborate trims signaled wealth. Clever motifs could serve as inside jokes among townsfolk. Every addition communicates a message, and every stitch must respect the garment's proportions while enhancing its narrative. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors use tiny bells sewn into cuffs or hems, designed to jingle lightly as the wearer walked, warning neighbors or simply announcing presence. Imagine walking through a market, each step a delicate chime of craftsmanship and subtle social signaling. You can almost hear the rhythm in your mind and feel the absurd charm of it. Historians still argue about the prevalence of such whimsical embellishments. Were they common across social classes, or reserved for the daring and wealthy? Written records capture some, but most rely on surviving garments, which are rare and skewed toward nobility. The debate continues, highlighting the tension between fashion as utility and fashion as expression. The apprentices now work on small decorative elements, embroidering hems, adding tiny loops for buttons, testing contrasting threads against linen. One apprentice experiments with a small embroidered flower, asking if it's too loud. The master chuckles softly, advising subtlety. Even tiny embellishments, he explains, must follow rhythm and proportion. The eye of the tailor guides the hand. You try stitching a simple geometric pattern, noting how easily your fingers remember previous movements from proportion drills. Needle enters, cloth yields, thread loops. Each motion familiar, yet subtly different, like learning a dance anew. The act of ornamentation requires attention, patience, and imagination. A single misplaced stitch can throw off balance, while a carefully placed motif elevates an otherwise plain shirt. He then shows you a clever trick. Hidden pockets and small loops tucked into seams, invisible unless one knows to look. The functional merge with the decorative, a hallmark of masterful tailoring. Even a plain shirt can surprise the wearer, an extra tie for securing sleeves, a hidden pouch for coins, small whispers of foresight stitched into everyday life. The apprentices begin to argue playfully over patterns and placement, debating which threads best highlight the weave without overpowering the silhouette. You notice how argument mirrors practice. Debate itself becomes a form of measurement, a way to calibrate taste against proportion, function, and rhythm. By late afternoon, several garments gleam with subtle embroidery, practical adornments, and tiny flourishes of genius. You feel an odd pride, knowing that these additions, threads, beads, and loops carry a kind of intellectual weight. Each stitch is an argument, a tiny essay in fabric, embodying centuries of observation, intuition, and cultural memory. As shadows lengthen, the master inspects each piece carefully. His nods are sparse but approving, his eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. He reminds the apprentices that adornment, like repair or layering, is a conversation between hands, eyes, and fabric. A garment is not complete until it carries both function and expression. You leave the workshop that evening feeling the resonance of centuries stitched into your fingers. The shirt you wear now isn't simply cloth. It is proof of knowledge passed from hand to hand, observation to observation, stitch by stitch. It tells stories, signals identity, and carries the subtle echoes of all who shaped it before you. The morning sun filters gently through the workshop windows, illuminating threads, chalk dust, and scraps that have accumulated over weeks of meticulous work. Today, the master tells you, the lesson is synthesis, the culmination of every skill you have observed and practiced. Measuring, proportion, layering, repair, display, and ornamentation. Everything is to be brought together in a single creation, a shirt that embodies both function and artistry, knowledge and intuition. You stand at the long workbench, stretching your hands over the cloth, feeling its texture, its weight, its memory. Mainstream historical sources confirm that such cumulative projects were typical in apprenticeship programs. Creating a garment from start to finish was considered the ultimate test of skill. Only after successfully combining multiple techniques could an apprentice be considered fully capable of independent work. A quirky tidbit: in some workshops, the final garment would be ceremonially presented to the master, sometimes worn by an apprentice in a small mock parade through the market. It was both test and spectacle, a way of showing skill to peers and townsfolk alike. You imagine yourself, sleeves neatly pinned, thread glinting, stepping into the sunlight as neighbors peer curiously from doorways. Historians still argue whether such ceremonial displays were common or mainly anecdotal. Written records are sparse, and surviving garments rarely include notes on their first public unveiling. Yet experimental reenactments suggest the practice would have reinforced both pride and reputation within the workshop community. You begin cutting the cloth, guided by the body rather than rulers. Fingers trace the intended seams, elbows measure arm width, and eyes judge drape. The apprentices bustle around, each responsible for small segments. One prepares the lining, another threads buttons, a third arranges small decorative stitches. The workshop is alive with sound, scissors snipping, chalk scratching, thread pulling through fabric. Every movement is both deliberate and instinctive, muscle memory blending with conscious thought. You notice how the lessons of repair inform your cuts. Panels allow for adjustment, seams are reinforced where strain will fall, and the hem has just enough slack to accommodate growth or movement. Layering principles ensure the shirt will be comfortable under additional garments, and ornamentation adds subtle signals of skill and creativity. You feel the rhythm of the workshop become part of you. your hands moving almost independently, guided by the sum of every observation and practice you have witnessed. The master moves silently among the apprentices, nodding occasionally, murmuring soft corrections. A patch here, a stitch there, a subtle adjustment to a cuff. Each intervention is gentle, almost imperceptible, yet it elevates the work. You realize that mastery is not only about technique, but about understanding the interplay between cloth, body, and movement. Finally, the shirt is assembled. You hold it up against yourself, feeling the combined wisdom of weeks, the precise cut of sleeves, the gentle alignment of seams, the careful layering, the small decorative touches that speak of both artistry and practicality. It fits perfectly, not because a tape measure dictated dimensions, but because the human body, memory, and observation have guided every decision. The master smiles, satisfied, and gestures for the apprentices to gather. Today is not merely about completion. It is about recognition, understanding that every skill, proportion, repair, layering, ornamentation, and display has been woven together into a single creation. The shirt is a testament to the continuity of craft, knowledge, and the silent intelligence of human hands. As the workshop quiets, you run your fingers over the finished garment one last time. You notice the subtle tension in the thread, the soft give of fabric under pressure, the elegance of well-considered decoration. This single shirt carries the history of hands that measured by eye, cut by intuition, and stitched by care. You feel a profound connection to centuries of artisans, a continuum of craft stretching back long before rulers or standardized measurements existed. You leave the workshop with a sense of quiet awe. The city beyond the doors hums as always, markets, children, animals, voices, but in your mind, the lessons linger. The shirt is more than clothing. It is a record of human ingenuity, a bridge between sight and touch, observation and action. You realize that every garment you wear carries echoes of those who came before, shaping the way humans move, adapt, and express themselves. The day fades gently into evening, and you find yourself alone with the quiet rhythm of the workshop settling around you. Sunlight softens through the dusty windows, pooling in gentle patches across benches and scattered scraps. You sit, hands resting on the smooth surface of the final shirt, and feel the weight of everything you've witnessed. Measurements taken by fingers, garments adjusted by intuition, layers folded with care, stitches placed with precision and imagination. Every lesson you have observed converges into a single awareness. That clothing is not merely fabric sewn together, but a dialogue between body, mind, and material. Each fold, each patch, each tiny decorative flourish carries stories. Of the people who wore these clothes, of apprentices learning, of masters teaching. You imagine centuries of hands, working in small, dimly lit workshops, tracing curves with palms, testing drape with elbows, refining knowledge without rulers, without precise tools, guided by observation and memory. The hum of daily life beyond the walls, footsteps, market chatter, distant bells, fades into a gentle background, almost like a lullaby. The knowledge you have absorbed, though practical, feels almost sacred in its continuity, a quiet inheritance passed through touch and repetition. You feel a deep sense of connection, not only to the artisans before you, but to all who wear clothing shaped by human care, whether stitched in wealth or in necessity. As the light dims completely, you take a slow, calm breath. Every thread, every seam, every fold is a reminder of ingenuity, patience, and the intimacy of craft. You let your shoulders relax, letting the world soften around you. In this quiet, the lessons of the workshop settle into memory like gentle echoes, and you feel the rhythm of human hands stretching backward and forward through time. Now dim the lights, let your body sink into the bed, and allow these images, these quiet, steady rhythms, to carry you towards sleep. You are wrapped not only in cloth, but in the history of human care, and tonight, that gentle weight is enough.